before you hand over the keys with host Anne-Marie Hayes. This is episode 4, Best Cars for Teens with Becca Weast. Welcome back, everybody. Really glad you've joined our podcast. I'm Anne-Marie Hayes from Teens Learn to Drive, based in Ontario. We're a nonprofit. We're dedicated to helping teens stay safe in cars. And today we're going to be talking about the cars that they drive and the best cars for teens. And I remember reading something in the Sunday paper a couple of years ago and about a dad who was an auto guy, and he restored this gorgeous Mustang for his daughter. Cherry red, vintage car, convertible. I mean, it was absolutely beautiful and clearly a work of love for this dad. But as a choice for the teen, it's not a great choice. It had too much power, and it's too tempting for a teen to drive that car too fast. And it just was a really poor choice. I also saw a couple of years ago one of those reality shows, and my daughter dragged me to it. I don't normally watch those, but it was about one of those, my big, beautiful 16th birthday or something like that. And the dad had a Hummer customized for his daughter. It was super stretch with party lights and an incredible sound system in the back seat. In my opinion, that was more for the dad to show off that he had a lot of bucks because it must have cost a fortune, but it was a really poor choice. I mean, I can't imagine driving that car, and I've been driving a long time, let alone learning to drive on it. And it's a party on the road. I mean, it's just a distraction waiting to happen. So really poor choices. So, there's so much out there. There are so many different issues when it comes to teens and cars that today we have an expert from the Insurance Institute of Highway Safety. Becca Weast is here with us today, and she is a research scientist with the IIHS, and she's going to talk to us, help us kind of move through how we make the decisions and what we should be looking for in best cars for teens. So welcome, Becca.
Hi, Anne-Marie. Thanks so much for having me here today. And yeah, there's a lot to talk about, so let's get into it.
There is. Now, one of the things that in this particular time in the history of the world is COVID, and we've seen prices spike for used cars. I mean, higher than they've ever been before. And so that makes it really hard for parents. And some parents might be tempted to get a little mini car or go with an old clunker for a new driver and then, wait until the market calms down a little bit and then we'll pick up something better. What would your advice be about that?
I mean, it's very difficult to tell parents who are, stuck at home with their kids and their kids are, losing so much freedom during their teenage years, and they really just want to equip them with something that'll allow them to get out and kind of have a life, and also free up parents' time. I think that motivates a lot of parents to just say like, oh, okay, this is one less thing that I have to, do, but there are real limits to what you should put your kid in, as far as, like, you really don't want to put your teen in like a micro or a mini car. Some small cars offer some decent protection, and we'll recommend those, but something like a smart car or a mini, like an actual mini, anything that's classified as a micro or mini car just doesn't fare very well in a crash. And you kind of have to think about, there are a lot of factors that we'll get into, but the really tiny ones just don't protect the occupants as well as something that's a little bit larger in a crash. And so, parents really have to weigh the pros and cons of like, oh, okay, freedom is nice, but also if something were to happen, which is something that every parent worries about, and I'm sure the teens worry about in a different way, but they do. You want to have your teen protected in their vehicle. And as far as older vehicles go, I mean, things are pricey enough that even older vehicles are expensive now, just because everything is, because supply is so limited. But it's been kind of a dynamic process over decades to really improve the quality of crash protections in vehicles and safety and handling and all sorts of things. And cars that are, over 10 years old are not going to be as safe as something that's a bit newer. They're just not. They're maybe not going to have electronic stability control. Maybe they won't have the best options for seatbelt, or the seatbelts will probably be fine, but they won't have the best airbag protections, and the structural integrity of the cars stuff that you don't necessarily think about.
Well, I think we can break that down a little bit too and talk about some of the really important features that you were talking about. But I guess one of the things I want to kind of point out right up front is so maybe a big company like Toyota or Ford. I mean, how do we know that it's a level playing field that, somebody's not taking $100,000 to give all the Toyota or Ford cars an excellent rating?
That's a good question. And, IIHS is funded by insurance companies. We're an independent nonprofit. And the function of IIHS is to make cars and driving safer. And we don't do that if we are stacking the deck in one direction or another. Crash outcomes are important to us. So we buy the cars that we test. So that's in our budget. We buy the cars and we crash test them.
Oh, they buy these incredible brand new cars and then smash them into it. Yeah.
Oh, the first crash test I ever saw when I started this job, it was, a little over 5 years ago now. The very first crash test I went to was Tesla Model S. It's a hard crunch to watch.
For sure. I was actually lucky enough that several years ago I was at your facility, watched a crash test, and I should point out that these are the real crash test dummy people, not the group, but the people who created the real crash test dummies. That when cars crash, first of all, there are cameras everywhere to capture everything, and motion sensors and all kinds of sensors and everything to pull the data. But the crash test dummies also provide a great deal of data about head injuries, neck injuries, when the car collapses, what would have been broken or severed or damaged on the drivers or
Yes.
passengers.
If you go to our website, we detail 6 different types of crash tests that we do. And when we first started doing crash testing, we would do just a moderate overlap, which means the front of the vehicle overlaps to, a certain degree with the obstacle that it's crashing into. So instead of just a head on, the whole vehicle crashes into an obstacle, into a barrier. Moderate overlap is 40% of the front of the vehicle on the driver's side overlaps with the barrier, which mimics kind of like you don't usually just crash straight into a wall if you're driving and you crash. You usually crash into part of an object or another, like an oncoming vehicle or some other thing. So this more accurately mimics what an actual like real life crash would be like. So we do moderate overlap crash tests, and then we do small overlap, which I think it's 20 or 25% overlap. So it's a little, it's supposed to mimic either just clipping the front end of another vehicle or hitting something like a pole or a signpost. And we do those on both the passenger and the driver's side now.
Yeah, and that data helps you determine, and then you go and rate the car based on all of the data that you pull together. So some of the things that we've talked about before and are like size matters in a vehicle. You've already mentioned the really tiny mini cars are not good choices because they don't have the protection around them. But I've heard parents say, okay, I want to put my kid in a tank. Big metal, even an old one is okay because it's a lot of metal around them and that'll protect them. How do you respond to that?
Well, larger cars, we don't have a lot of data on this, but larger, like the very, very big ones, like something like an Expedition, or I don't know if the model names are going to be the same in the US and Canada. Something I should have probably looked into. But like, yeah, like a Suburban or yeah, like a big Ford Expedition, something that's really, really big, can be more difficult to handle. And while it is slower to accelerate, which is something that we encourage for cars for teen drivers, usually we encourage that you do that by having something with lower horsepower. Um, but like a bigger car, it's slower to accelerate. It's also a little slower to brake. And it's going to, it can, if it is equipped with the correct kinds of, seatbelt and airbags. And it was made recently enough that the roll cage and the structure of the vehicle is good. Like it can protect the occupants, but it's not necessarily going to be so great for whatever they crash into. And so yeah, we tend to recommend things in the middle of the size range. And discourage people from putting their kids in a full tank. Also, if you have a bigger vehicle, it's easier for teens to drive their peers around, and that is generally, like, we have some solid data on that being a contributor to teen crashes, is having their peers in the
Yeah,
car with
the
them.
distraction of having the other people in the car, which was one of the things that outraged me about the Hummer situation with the party lights and the sound system. And as far as sound system goes, just so parents know, I mean, the sound should never be that loud that they can't hear an ambulance coming or something happening on the road or somebody yelling. That you need to be aware of what's happening around you too. So, as far as I know, the on the website, then parents can go there and actually look at lists of cars in all kinds of price ranges, whether you're buying new or used, like recommended cars.
Hmm. Yeah, so we have two lists, and we most recently updated our list. I think we've done it twice now in cooperation with Consumer Reports. So we've, incorporated a couple more things into our criteria, but the principle of the list is kind of twofold. Like, we want to make it clear to parents that you don't have to spend top dollar on a brand new car that's equipped with all the bells and whistles to keep your teen safe. There are lots of ways and lots of price ranges to do that. And second, there are four things that we like to look out for, and recommend that parents keep in mind and make sure is on their teen cars. So the presence of electronic stability control is number one. I think a lot of parents, at least the ones that I've surveyed, have been like really keyed in on automatic or anti-lock brakes, and like it's well it's very like in like the 90s and early aughts, that was the thing that was in all the car ads, and that was what we talked about. And like, oh, it's new that it's standard on everything. And so that's the thing that comes to people's minds. And I think people forget about electronic stability control, but that's a really key one, because that one helps the teen if they're driving in unfamiliar conditions, or they just don't have the experience handling a car in suboptimal roadway conditions, and that'll help them
We
keep
do have a
control.
video that we'll insert here, and you can see really clearly in the video a car without electronic stability control. And when the driver kind of jerks the steering wheel or turns suddenly, the car will sway, even to the point where the driver can lose control. Whereas the electronic stability control, the car actually counteracts the oversteering or the sharp turn, and allows the driver to better maintain control of the car and keep it on the
Mhm.
road.
If you enter a curve too fast and start to lose control of your vehicle, you might not safely make it through the turn. Electronic stability control is a feature that can help you avoid this kind of disaster. About half of all fatal passenger vehicle crashes on U.S. roads involve a single vehicle, and crash studies indicate that ESC can reduce these crashes by more than half. ESC is an extension of anti-lock brake technology with speed sensors and independent braking for each wheel. Additional ESC sensors continuously monitor a driver's steering input and can tell if the vehicle is pointed in the intended direction. On slippery roads, curves, or in emergency maneuvers, the front end of a vehicle may start to plow ahead, or the rear end may spin out. When this occurs, ESC brakes individual wheels to maintain control and may also reduce engine speed to bring the car back into the intended line of travel. The benefits of ESC are clear. If every vehicle on the road had ESC, we might avoid as many as 600,000 single vehicle crashes each year and save as many as 10,000 lives.
So that's number one. Number two, we've touched on a little bit, is we want teens to be in slightly heavier, not heaviest, but heavier vehicles, because those offer a bit more bulk and a bit more protection if in the unfortunate event of a crash.
Small cars are a lot safer than they were just a few years ago, but that doesn't mean they offer the same level of protection as larger ones. To see how the laws of physics affect their protection in a crash, we recently conducted a series of tests crashing mini cars and a microcar into midsize cars from the same manufacturer. Crash test results tell you a lot about the differences in vehicle performance within a size class, but you can't compare a small car with a good rating to a larger car with the same rating. That's because size and weight are important in how the crash turns out. Vehicle size protects occupants in crashes because bigger vehicles usually have longer front ends with longer crush zones. The longer the crush zone, the longer the vehicle crushes, and the lower the forces on the occupants inside. We chose these cars for our new crash test because Honda, Toyota, and Daimler, which makes Mercedes and smart cars, all have mini cars or microcars with good crashworthiness ratings. However, crash test ratings aren't the whole story. All other things being equal, people in larger, heavier cars will fare better in their crashes than people in smaller, lighter cars. In a crash between a small, lightweight car and a heavier one, the smaller car is driven backwards. That means higher forces on the occupants of the smaller car and lower ones on the occupants of the bigger one. The Toyota Yaris gets a good rating in our frontal offset test. In a head-on crash with another mini car at these speeds, it would do well. But as you can see, against the larger and heavier Camry, the occupant compartment basically collapsed. We have buckles in the roof here, and the door sill is bent toward the ground. In a real-world crash like this, the driver of the Yaris would sustain serious injuries. By comparison, the driver of the Camry would fare much better. The results of these tests don't mean that we can't have good fuel economy and safety. Cars like this Ford Fusion Hybrid and the Toyota Camry Hybrid are larger and heavier than mini cars and microcars, but they get the same or better fuel economy. Although all cars have gotten much safer in recent years, you can't repeal the laws of physics. Large, heavier cars still provide better occupant protection in a crash than smaller, lighter ones.
We also recommend that teens drive vehicles with lower horsepower because they accelerate more slowly. And so a point to make here is, I think, yes, there are some teens that are just like very into driving fast and have very like skewed risk perception. You know, teens think they're immortal and like you just don't really have a sense of exactly the risk that you're taking when you're taking those risks. And they'll go, really fast because it's fun. And I think there's also a component of teenagers that, there's a subset of teenagers that aren't out to do reckless things. They're just don't have the experience to know when they're driving too fast for conditions. So having a high horsepower vehicle makes it easier to drive faster and be not necessarily aware that you're driving too fast.
And there's the peer pressure that goes with that too. A lot of horsepower is not a great feature.
Yeah, those were 2 and 3. And number 4 is just, a vehicle with the best crash test rating available. There are a number of independent crash test agencies. We do our crash testing and we publish all of our results online. And you can kind of, if you have a make and model of a car, you can look back historically at how well that car has done over the years. And you can compare it to other cars, and you can look at all of the different crash test ratings. And now we rate headlight quality as well. And we also do ratings of crash avoidance systems. Crash avoidance systems have been developing pretty rapidly over the last few years. They still are, mostly on newer vehicles. So if, for example, you're a parent and you have a vehicle that you bought for yourself, I don't know, 5 years ago, and maybe you spent some money on it, and it has, automatic emergency braking and some kind of a lane keeping or lane departure warning feature. And maybe it has, blind spot monitoring, that kind of stuff. There are features that help the car help you to drive the car. Like it offloads some of the difficult parts of the driving task onto you. So automatic emergency braking have sensors in the front of the car, and it will sense if you're about to crash into something, and it will deploy the brakes at very short notice. Now, I've done this. Like we will demonstrate these on site sometimes for people, and it's really abrupt. It's better if you just use your own brakes. But if you're, say, in stop and go traffic, it's kind of nice to have these systems. But yeah, these are lane departure warnings or lane maintenance systems that will actually steer you back into the lane. They monitor where you are relative to the paint on the side of the roads, like on the road. and will kind of steer you, like they'll tell you when you're crossing a line, or they will actively steer you back into the lane. The most active ones will actually constantly monitor where you are in the lane and keep you in the center of the lane.
A little scary when it comes to teens, because you hate to think somebody's going to rely on a system like that. First of all, it's not totally reliable. And your next car, your friend's car, your mom's car may not have it. So those things are a little bit scary to me.
I think it all comes down to the quality of the instruction that the teen gets. So if you are a parent and you say want to, instead of buying your teen a new car, you want to either share your car with them, or you want to hand down a car that you already own and maybe it's equipped with those features, then a part of the education process has to be teaching them how to act, like to correctly use those systems. And you can't teach something that you don't understand fully yourself. So the very first step for a parent who wants to teach their teen how to use various driver assistance features is to, first of all, know what your car is equipped with and exactly what it does and doesn't do. The doesn't do is really important, because some of the automatic, like the front crash prevention systems, handle different kinds of obstacles differently, and some of them are equipped to deal with pedestrians at certain speeds and some of them aren't. So you should know what it will and will not detect, and you can find that information out from the manufacturer's website. In the user manual, you can call up a dealership and talk to a salesperson. There are lots of different places to find that information. I think the variety of practice driving that a teen gets is the biggest indicator, and like the thing that's setting them up for success. So getting a variety in to at a level of complexity that a parent judges is appropriate for their teen. And that's, I think, the most complicated.
It
It's
just
so
so many
complicated. It's
aspects
so
to
hard.
that.
It's so
Absolutely.
easier said than
Yeah.
done.
Yeah, absolutely. The other thing is that I would not recommend that anybody test out those features. You're not a test dummy.
Don't be a dummy, please.
Yeah, don't be a dummy.
I'm sure there have been public health and safety campaigns around, like, don't be, like, really. Like, it may look fine, like, oh, you're going 5 miles an hour, it's not that bad, but, like, I've been in a front-on crash where we were both going 15 miles an hour, and it was a lot. And, I don't recommend it. Also, we talk about safety and, outcomes. Really the important thing, if you are unfortunately in a crash, is, your own health and safety. But the other part of that, once the dust clears and you realize you're fine, is like, your car is wrecked. Like, don't do it. It's such a pain.
Yeah. Oh, and the financial, the whole thing. Yeah. But which brings up two other things. Airbags is one. I know that's a big recommendation. Most people have front airbags, kind of behind the glove box and in the steering wheel now, but there are lots of other airbags that can really help to protect occupants. Maybe talk about those a little bit.
So I actually looked into this because it's not my area, but I've been learning some very interesting things preparing for this. So since the 1999 model year, at least in the US, all new manufactured cars were required to have both a front driver and a front passenger airbag. So any car made after 1999 is going to, at the very least, have front crash airbags. Since then, from what I've been seeing, the requirements focus on the forces that act on the person in the car. So the amount of protection for, say, your head and torso in a side impact crash. So the regulations don't require that manufacturers use like side curtain airbags, but in order to meet the requirements of like maximum forces acting on the person in a side impact crash, a lot of manufacturers have turned to these side airbags that come down from the roof of the car. Yeah, they come down like a curtain. That's why they're called side curtain airbags. And so a lot of newer cars, I think since 2014, it's become incredible. Like, that's when the regulations went into effect. So cars that were manufactured in or after 2014, like in the 2014 model year, are more likely to have kind of all around airbag support. And then there are some manufacturers that will put in like leg airbags for the driver that are supposed to limit the forces acting on like the lower body in a crash. And they will also potentially regulate the amount of force that's acting on your torso as well, because if you're legs don't slide forward as far, then you take less force in your torso from the air, or from the airbag and the seatbelt. So it basically just, distributes the force of the crash and the protection more evenly across your body. That's the reasoning behind having those. So yeah, the newer the car, the more innovative the crash protections. And so a newer car is usually going to be better. But again, you don't have to have a brand new car to have a lot of these innovations. These have been in effect for nearly 10 years now in a lot of cases.
One thing to note there, though, is that when people buy a used car, um, there it there was, I don't know if there still is, a thing where they don't replace the airbag, because replacing an airbag, if the car's been involved in a collision and the airbag deployed, in some cases people choose not to replace the airbag because it costs a lot of money. It's completely unethical. But somebody could conceivably buy a car that's supposed to be equipped with an airbag, and that's not there. And that's when I think that systems like Carfax are important, or programs. I don't know, application. I don't know what to call it, but like Carfax, where you can find out the history of the vehicle and whether or not it's been involved in a collision. Because I'm not sure, and I have to admit, I really don't know if a mechanic looks at the vehicle before you buy it, a used vehicle. Can they tell if the airbag is there or not? I really don't know. And I know it's not fair to ask you, but do you know?
I do. Yeah. I mean, this is just a point to advocate for conscious consumerism. And, I know like buying a car is a stressful process. So I feel like there is motivation to just get it over with. But yeah, there are steps that you can take. Like most dealerships will allow you to take the car to a third party to have it inspected. At least they'll do it here. When my fiance bought his car, we took it to like their family mechanic and had it inspected. And, all of the major structural things were intact, and so he felt comfortable buying that car. I would say it's a big red flag if the salesperson doesn't want you to. You like, if it's like the price is too good to be true, and they're just not letting you get close to it, and they don't want somebody else looking at it, that's a good sign to walk away and find something else. And yeah, like the resources that we have kind of recommending cars in different price ranges, and the information that you can get from new car salespeople, even if you're not buying a new car. You can talk to people like that. You can go on manufacturer websites, and then, seeking out support from third party inspector or mechanic. Definitely. I feel like the process is complex and it can just be a lot, but if you kind of spell out those little things like, okay, I want to look at crash test ratings. I want to know that some third party has looked at it. I want to have a record of the history of the car. And I want to know, that it satisfies the requirements, that, it's a lower horsepower vehicle and it's maybe a little bit bigger.
And another one to add to the checklist is Kelley Blue Book, which is also available in Canada and helps you understand what the price range for that vehicle should be. I mean, I watch Judge Judy periodically, and I mean, people on Judge Judy will buy old Mercedes, 30-year-old Mercedes, because they want to say they drove a Mercedes. That's not the kind of judgment to use, especially when you're buying a car for a teen. I mean, you really want to focus on safety. Another issue there is how much you pay for insurance. And I assume because you are, how do I want to put this, that the funding comes from by insurance companies, that they use the data that you produce to help set rates for insurance on different vehicles.
I believe they do, but kind of necessarily, just to protect the integrity of the science that we're doing. I don't have contact with insurers. Our member companies, the ones that fund us, we have board meetings 3 times a year, and we will show them the research that they're paying us to do. And occasionally we'll get very broad strokes feedback like, oh, marijuana is really interesting right now, we're concerned about that, and it's interesting to us too, because it's like scientifically a very rich topic to look into the impact of marijuana legalization on crash outcomes in different places.
Like Canada, it's legal across our country.
Yeah, so in the US, we've had some really interesting kind of naturalistic experiments where like one state will legalize recreational marijuana and a neighboring state with a similar climate and road conditions and whatnot won't. And then you can compare crash outcomes from before legalization and after legalization. So we've done a couple of studies like that.
You know, when it comes to insurance, I had an interesting, and I know this is not your area of expertise, but I had two vehicles. One was a brand new, both the same manufacturer. One was brand new, the other one was 10 years old. And the insurance premiums for both of them were identical because on the older one, I didn't have collision anymore. So, you know, that made that one a little bit lower. But on the other one, the real expensive part of insurance is if people are injured. And so it was so much better protection that lowered the cost of the insurance on that one. So the 10-year-old and the brand new one with full collision and everything were identical, which I found fascinating at the time. And I think it's because insurance companies pay attention to the safety devices on the vehicle.
Oh, absolutely. And yeah, there's so much intricate, detail that goes into determining how safe or unsafe a vehicle is and how likely it is to weather a crash and how likely it is to do damage to another vehicle and how likely you are to be injured or somebody else is to be like, there's so much calculus that goes into this. Like it's not straight. I'm sure it's straightforward to the people that do it. It's not straightforward to me. It's a mystery black box to me. But yeah, the one thing I do know as far as teen drivers go is most insurers will they'll have what they call a rated driver on the policy, and the insurance rate, like the rate that you pay, is set by the highest risk driver on the policy. So if you have just like a blanket policy for your family on all of your family cars, if you have a really expensive car and a teenager, then your teenager is going to be the rated driver on that expensive car. And I think some will allow you to say like, no, my teen doesn't drive this car. They're only on these two cars. But yeah, there's a lot of nuance that goes into it. And I also know that some insurance companies will, give discounts for, teens that can demonstrate that they have taken certain steps to become better drivers. I can't speak to the data that supports those things just because studies of driver education are really difficult to do. And I think a lot of them have to do with, the kind of driver education that a teen undergoes.
And I guess the best advice there would be to call the insurance company and say, this is the car I'm looking at getting. Can you tell me what the premiums would be? Oh, you had another really good point. And that was for parents who have younger kids now. They're not teens yet, and about affecting their car decisions today.
Yes. So this is a thing that I've been trying to advocate for more and more in the last few years, as it's become really evident to me that, parents, like, cars are getting more and more expensive, and buying a car that's well equipped is, you don't buy a car planning to get rid of it in a couple of years. You probably want to hang on to it for a while. So parents who have, young children, maybe they're still in a booster seat in the car. They're not thinking about that child growing up and driving the car most of the time if they're shopping for a car when their kid is still in a booster seat. But if you're hanging on to a car for long enough, and then, that car is like, oh, maybe I'll trade it in, maybe I'll get a new one. And it's in the perfect kind of like age range to hand down to your kid. Then what you did when you were shopping for your car when your kid was 5 was you were buying your teenager a car. So something to consider if you have younger children is, if you're shopping for a car, consider not just what you want and what is good for you with your young children, but also consider what you would want to hand down to your kid when they start driving themselves. Because as I hear, the time passes very quickly, and you blink and suddenly they're asking you about driver education and like when they can get their license, and they want you to take them practice driving. So, maybe it doesn't feel like it's passing very quickly when you're like in the tunnel with the young kids, but it will. And that I think over half of cars that teens drive, if a teen has a car that they're the primary driver of, like if a teen has a car that is theirs, over half of those are not purchased for the teen at the time they start driving. Those are handed down from somewhere in the family.
Well, on that point, I mean, maybe grandparents should be looking at that too, because I know of at least a couple of cases where grandparents have handed down vehicles, and so maybe they should be thinking about that too. You know, what would be safe for my grandson to drive 5 years from now or whatever.
Well, I mean, the great thing about the recommendations that we make is there's solid safety recommendations for everybody. I mean, these are things that we're especially concerned about with teenagers. But yeah, I think everybody should be considering the crash ratings of the vehicle that they're buying. And you should be considering, maybe you really want something fast, but then consider whether you have something else in your like maybe you want like a Subaru WRX that's got a lot of horsepower, something that's turbocharged, something that's really fun to drive, and just like if you are buying something like that when your child is young, it's definitely worth factoring into your decision. Like if you have two cars within your household, maybe you have something that's fun and something that's safe. I mean, they're all really safe at this point. They've all gotten very good at passing crash tests, but like something that's like the experienced adult driver car, and then something that may be more appropriate for a teen.
I definitely recommend everybody take a look at the site, take a look at the various different offerings, whether and the ratings on them, and take that seriously because it's parents have the most to lose, and it's such an easy choice if you're safety focused.
Yes. And, our website is just a wealth of information on so many different topics. So it's easy to go down a rabbit hole of being like, oh, I never knew that was a thing. I do it all the time and I work here.
Oh, it's wonderful. And it's beyond just the cars themselves. It's all kinds of I think there were things about pedestrians and biking and there's all kinds of great information there. So I would definitely recommend that people take a look at that. You're right. It is a rabbit hole, but
It is, but it points to like we have a social media presence, mostly just to share our results because we want everybody to have access to the stuff that we are doing. Like we're not doing the science for like we are. I'm sure that it benefits me. I drive a car, and I enjoy doing science for a living because I'm curious and I think it's fun. But we're doing this so that everybody can be safer because I'm safer on the road when the people around me driving are also safer. And that's something that I think parents, you get so focused on your own teen, rightfully so, that, you're also considering, even if you don't have a teenager in your life and you're not necessarily concerned about it, there are teenagers driving cars on the road around you. And if those teens are not being safe, they're putting you at risk too. And parents of teens, you have to be aware of, I'm sure you're concerned about your own teen safety, but you should be concerned too about risks that they are putting, like that they are exposing the other people on roads to. Like the responsibility of driving is very much a community responsibility.
absolutely, it is. And it's funny because we had Christine Raby on yesterday when we were recording about teaching teens to drive, and she said the same thing. The other thing is that for parents, you can be really careful and safety focused and go to IIHS and make really good decisions about the vehicle you buy. But you also need to be concerned about what your neighbors do because your teens will be in their vehicles too. And so I would really encourage parents to share what they learn from these podcasts with their teens, friends, families, and that kind of stuff because the information is there for everybody and you can make all the right decisions. But when they get in the car with another friend, you have absolutely no control and you're dependent on that driver's skills and whatever car their parents selected for them or they
Mm-hmm.
bought themselves.
Yeah. And also, our website, points to our YouTube channel, and there are lots of videos of our crash tests. And like there's some demonstrations that we do, crash tests, and then our actual, consumer ratings crash tests. And it's important to know that, if you watch those, it's a pretty dramatic crash. Like it makes a big noise. And the car will like hit the barrier and like jump in the air a little bit and move sideways, and it's a thing. And you also have to keep in mind that those crash tests are done at 40 miles an hour. So they're done below highway speeds. And there are reasons for that. You know, if you do them at higher speeds, there's more of a likelihood that the very expensive instrumented crash test dummy is going to be damaged and need to be repaired. And then the forces are significant enough that, you know, the data just get a little bit messier. And so this is kind of the industry standard. Like crash tests are usually done below highway speed. So I don't generally like to use scare tactics because I don't think they necessarily stick. I think it's healthier to build good habits, and that's where the safety comes from. But you know, watching those crash tests, it's fascinating, and there's also really satisfying to just watch a big car go crunch. But keep in mind that like that's the damage that's done at 40 miles an hour. That's 40 miles an hour. It's not 65 to 80 miles an hour on the highway. Like you're not going 100 kph in a crash test.
Yeah, that's I have to look that up, but I think that's pretty close to 60 kilometers an hour, maybe 55 kilometers an hour, and which is a pretty low speed, all things being. So the damage is much worse at 120 kilometers an hour or 100 kilometers an hour. And so keeping that in mind as well. And some of your videos, what your videos really point out is how well protected manufacturers are making the passenger cabins now, that the car will crumple and the car might be a write-off, but the passengers are protected, and they're really the most important part of the vehicle. You can replace the car, you can't replace the passengers.
Yes. Yeah, no, the manufacturers have done a really excellent job, and the innovations just keep coming. Like the people who engineer cars, like the people who engineer safety systems for cars are like they're very dedicated to what they do, and they're very good at it too. So they're going to keep coming. And you know, crashes, you know, we're not at zero crashes, we're not at zero crash deaths, but that's the goal. That's where we're moving towards. And some of that's going to come from engineering, some of it's going to come from consumer decision making, and a lot of it's going to come from behavior. So it's just going to be a really complicated community focused push forward to, you know, make roadways as safe as they possibly can be.
The other thing to consider is that a 2008 best pick is not the same as a 2018 best pick or a 2021-22 best pick. So just parents should make their best choices, you know, get the safest vehicle they can and concentrate on safety instead of the flashy, cool vehicle that maybe the teen wants.
Like avoid focusing on appearances, which I know is a little bit hard, especially if you just like really want to give your kid what they want. And then, you know, I think the hardest part, honestly, is telling people that, you know, the how to spend their money, because it can be very expensive to like getting a teen like through driver education, at least in the US, costs a fair amount of money. And then there's, you know, the fee to take your road test, and there's insurance, and there's the car, and then the teen has to pay for gas for the car. And, you know, it just adds up so quickly. So I think the motivation is to find something that's affordable, and that's why our list has things at all range of prices, and we specify model year, and in some cases we specify, you know, this model year, but only if it was made between like after this point, because sometimes, you know, early in the model year we'll crash test something isn't quite right, they tweak it and put it into production. Yeah, that's a thing. So that's why you'll see that on our lists in a couple of places. It'll say like, oh, this, you know, blah, 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 made in say 2014, but only after August, something like that.
Good to know. Well, thank you so much. It's been wonderful talking to you, Becca, and I hope people have learned a lot. And to learn more, they'll go to see IIHS.org.
Yeah, come and check out our website. There's a lot of fun stuff there.
Thanks so much. Take care.
You too.
Bye.
Bye.
Before You Hand Over the Keys was brought to you by Teens Learn to Drive. Check out our website at teenslearntodrive.com for more information, videos, and resources.